Welcome, everyone, to the next edition of the Care CEO Success Stories podcast. My name is Adam James of Spring Up PR, and today on the episode, I'm delighted to say we have Rich Adams. He is the CEO of Sears Healthcare, which has 3 care homes, which runs and operates 3 care homes in the Wiltshire area. And today, Rich will be talking about how to find and recruit those good people to work in your care provider team, and then give them the opportunities to do even better. And we're also going to be touching on, and I know many of you will recognize this, on how to keep going in the sector, in the care sector, where many things are coming from us in all angles at all times, it seems, and the importance of facing those problems and still caring. So it's going to be a great episode with Rich, and I'm delighted that he's here. However, before I get going, as I said, my name's Adam James at Spring Up PR. We have done a number of these episodes with some great guests where the leading care CEOs in the country share and talk about some of their achievements and what they often consider their single biggest achievement or achievement they are most proud of. And please make sure you do all the good things like and share and give us a good review. It would just help spread the word and make sure everyone in the sector gains and learns, as I say, from the leading lights in the sector. So please make sure you do that. And if you don't know about us, we're Spring Up PR. We help care providers become famous and recognized via PR and marketing strategies in order to raise their profile, reputation, to get more inquiries and recruit more staff, good quality staff, faster. So head over to springup-pr.com and then you can find a whole load more about us and free podcasts and videos and tips and advice. So without any further ado, to coin the cliche, let's get into the episode with Rich Adams of Sears Healthcare. Thank you so much for joining us. And why don't you start off, Rich, by telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi Adam. Thanks for the invite. Always good to talk to people and connect to more people. So currently I'm Chief Exec at Sears Healthcare. So we are a small provider. We've got 3 care homes, always potentially looking for more, but currently 3. And we've been going for coming up to 4 years now. But like everybody, I'm always tempted to take 2.5 years off while we were dealing with a pandemic that came our way that we didn't see coming. So actually in some ways it still feels like a fairly new organization, certainly in terms of sort of developing and delivering our sort of organizational and operational plan. Before I came to Sears, I worked at Bupa for 4 years, and I had a number of roles there. I joined as head of quality in their care services division, then became director of care and quality, and then took on the role of chief nurse for all of Bupa's operations in the UK. So that was quite good, actually, because I got to branch out from the care home sector for a while and do, I suppose, a bit more healthcare and not just social care. And before that, I worked for Avery for 4 years in regional roles. So building up a bit of a back catalogue of roles now. It's always gone in 4-year cycles as well. And I'm thinking, I'm coming up to the 4th year. Yes. Maybe changes afoot.
Okay, great. Well, that's wonderful. The names that I know that we'll all recognize. Well, let's get straight in, Rich, by finding good people. How to recruit good people, which I know is a big issue, and many on this podcast have stressed how important it is. So tell me, Rich, your views on how to find the good people, how to recruit them, and how to recruit them.
Yeah, we touched on this, didn't we, in the pre-chat? And I kind of flippantly said, well, I think good people find you. But actually, I was kind of sat thinking about that while you giving your introduction. And I think that probably is true, actually, because people tend to be attracted to certain organizations more than other organizations. And what you do to make your organization attractive is probably very much a reflection of yourself. Certainly when you're a small organization. And I think there are things that will stand out as an organization to people who are looking to move, or actually people who just, I think we all have those organizations where we think, if a role came up, I'd really like to work there. in the same way that there are organizations where you think I wouldn't walk anywhere near that organization. And it's not necessarily because of any experience we've had, it's because of the views that we hold of those organizations from what we've seen from the outside. So how your organization comes across to other people is really important. And I suppose to some extent, like attracts like. I think for senior roles, most of us tend to work through recruiters. But actually, what I am seeing more of now is people taking a bit more control of their own recruitment, even for senior roles. And because lots of people are starting to build their own profiles. And as a result of that, you become much more immediately contactable. And I think, we're much easier to find than perhaps people have been historically. So I think that model is probably changing a bit. But it doesn't really matter how good all of those things are. You can't really make a judgment until you've got somebody sat in front of you.
Yeah.
And I always find the interview process absolutely fascinating. Both as an interviewer and as an interviewee. And I think I always we always have our list of questions that we're going to ask. And, and I sit down and I have a list of questions and I have my CV. And I think I probably rarely look at both or either right through the conversation. Because when I'm trying to find the right person, for me, I kind of want to know what that makes that person tick.
Yeah.
So I'll quite often ask questions about what their views are on certain things and why they think that. And not because I'm looking for somebody with the same view as me.
Yeah.
But because I'm looking for somebody who's actually thought about it or is thinking about the same things that I'm thinking about and has a view on it, because those conversations ultimately are the type of conversations you've got to be able to move your business forwards. So I tend to, there's the classic questions, tell me about a time when you did this, that, and the other, and you're asking somebody to sort of demonstrate their expertise through what they've done. But actually, if you're recruiting somebody into a role and it's a step up for them, I'm more interested in trying to work out what they would do in a certain situation, not what they've done in the past.
Yeah,
because things change, and sure, I could tell you stuff that I did in Avery and Bupa, in different situations. Would I do that now? No, I wouldn't, because the world is different, and how people respond to different situations has changed all the time. So I think it's trying to sort of get to grips with the sort of the forward view that person has and the type of things that they're engaged with. And I think also it's really important to kind of explore with them what their expectations are of an organization. What would we need to do for that person to fly?
Yeah.
What do we need to do for that person to perform at the best of their ability? And I think you do see, I've spoken about this before, I think you see it a lot where somebody has had a lot of success in one role and then they move to a different role in the organization, they move to a different team. And the structure and the setup around them is different on that side of the organization than it is to where they were. And they just really struggle to perform.
Yeah.
And it's about having those conversations and sort of understanding why that might be the case and what might need to change to make stuff happen. And the same when people move between organizations, you can move from being in one role in one organization to being in the same role in a different organization. And we quite often say that, what people saying is like same shit, different walls. But actually it is different. And how you cope and manage is going to very much depend on the people around you. And so those conversations that explore the fit of the person and how they think and what they feel and what's important to them, I think sort of get you to a much better place in terms of your appointments than talking about what people have done in previous situations and talking about past achievements.
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious to know, when you have these kind of interviews face-to-face with senior appointments, do you throw any particular curve or challenging questions that really come out of the blue, or are they the standard questions? Do you have anything in particular you feel is like, yeah, that's a nice question, I like that one?
Well, it tends to be more of a conversation because I think actually if you can't develop and have a conversation with that person, even it's a slightly artificial situation and they're nervous, but if you can't sort of generate that conversation and take things in a certain direction, I don't really think it matters how good they are at answering the questions, because on a day-to-day basis, I'm not going to be asking this person questions, I'm going to be having conversations with them. And those conversations have got to sort of get us through to a certain end point. So I don't particularly I suppose there's always some questions I want to ask, and you're probably going to ask the questions to get people going in the first place.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't ask a deliberately provocative question or try and throw in a curveball, because I've been on the receiving end of those, and I just don't find it particularly useful or helpful. And I think if you find yourself having to work hard and put those questions in, then it's probably not going the right way, is it?
Yeah. And when is it, Rich, you feel that you know that you've got a right fit? What brings about that feeling of, yeah, this is the person I want? Or is it ever so clear?
Well, I think you're very lucky if you go through a process and somebody absolutely fits what you're looking for. And I think you have to ask questions of yourself as well as to whether what you're absolutely looking for is really what you need and want in that role, or are you just looking for something that's going to make your life a bit easier?
Yeah.
When I tend to know I've found the right person is usually when they start asking me questions before I've sort of said, have you got any questions for me?
Yeah.
When they, if I say something and I don't know, they might say, well, that's really interesting. Why do you say that? And I think, oh, hello. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of, it's people who have enough ownership of their own practice that, I think, yeah, actually, I could put you in this role and not leave you to it. But actually, if I left you to it, you'd probably do a good job.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that one of the worst case scenarios is if you're making a hire and have you got any questions for me? And that's the moment when they're going to really, really shine, is the questions that they are.
Yeah.
If someone has no questions, oh, you're joking. But, those questions really show to what extent they really have been thinking about the role and what they're going to be doing. They're curious. Curiosity, I think, personally, is a massive asset to have. And, wanting to learn more to do a good job can be indicated by questions.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think the clincher for me is that they start asking the questions quite early on, not asking questions so that they avoid answering mine.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's part of that process of building a conversation. Conversations are based on questions, or good ones are anyway.
When has it gone wrong for you? We all make wrong decisions. What have you learned from making wrong decisions when recruiting?
Not trusting my gut instinct. I think to your point, when you've got somebody and they meet everything that you've asked for, they're delivering, but something tells you that this is not quite right. And I've made that mistake twice now, and I've just learnt my lesson, really. I just think, on paper, this should absolutely work. But I suppose in a way, that's what's brought me back into really thinking about the conversations more, rather than, well, you've answered all my questions, you've ticked all boxes. But, I think, crikey, there's been people around for a lot longer than I have been around in this sector. But I think I've been around long enough now to get a bit of a sense of what's going to work for me and what isn't. And sometimes, and actually, on both of those occasions that I'm thinking of, it's absolutely not the case that they weren't able to do the job. It was that they just did not function very well within the organizational culture. And it's not that there was anything wrong with the organizational culture. It just didn't work. Either the amount of latitude that they had in the role was actually too big for how they operated. They quite liked rules and very clear guidelines, and kind of just worked in a sort of in a different way to where we were as an organization at the time. Or actually the flip side of that, where it's been a little bit too prescriptive, and it's been prescriptive for a reason, but it just hasn't worked for that person, which is interesting because they were actually ex-army, so you'd have thought that would have worked really well, but it was just too big a culture change. And actually they probably would have done really well if it had been their next job. It's just, and you've got, getting all of these things is tricky, isn't it?
It's a fascinating area.
The timing's got to be right. It's got to come at the right point in that person's career. You've got people wanting to move up, people wanting to move down, people wanting to move across, people who just want to move. And you've got to try and unpick all of that. And I think conversations rather than questions help you unpick it better.
Yeah, that's great. And, we all know how so important it is that we get it right, and how it can be so consequential if it doesn't go right. So that's great. And just moving on to the second part of this, which is, providing and giving opportunities for people to do even better. So presumably you're hiring someone that's good and then enabling them to do even better. Tell me a little bit more about that, your approach, your philosophy, what you consider to be important.
Yeah. So once you've got them, you've got to keep them. I think one of the most powerful things when somebody that I work for is when you go to your monthly one-to-one and you sit down and you've got a list of things that you've done and what you need to talk about. And it's when that person is then saying to you, right, what do you need me to do to help you do that better? What do you need me to do to help you achieve that? And when I was first asked that, I kind of sat there and thought, I've got no idea, actually, because I've never been asked that question before.
Yeah, it's great.
And I've carried that with me now, because in the most senior roles, and certainly in a bigger organizations, I mean, I've only got 3 care homes here. In Bupa, I had 300.
Yeah.
I've got 27 nurses here. I had 4,500 in Bupa. Very different sort of scale of operation. But actually, when you're saying to your directors or your heads of department or other people in the organization, when you're operating at that level, as much as anything else, you're a convener, because you are actually the person that's got the power to bring people together. You're the person that's got the kind of the organizational clout, the heft, of your position to sort of sometimes just make things happen a bit more, so that these guys that you're asking to deliver projects for you have actually got a chance of getting them delivered.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen it on the flip side where people are being pushed to deliver, but they're not really getting any support from the people above them to deliver. They're just being told they have to deliver.
Yeah.
And yet you can have 4 or 5 different projects going on with it that all involve the same people that are all competing, that have all got to be delivered in the same cost and time envelope. And actually, I think it is your job as a senior person to say, right, how are we going to make all of this happen before we all fall out and nobody delivers anything?
Yeah.
And it's different people will need different things. I had somebody who was a really super head of department, and I just they basically just wanted to tell me what they were doing and then be left alone to do it, and then they'd come back and tell me when they'd done it and then what they were going on to do next, and they had this complete freedom to operate, and that really, really worked for them. If I'd have been bringing them up twice a day saying what you're doing now, there'd no way would they have functioned as well in that. Well, they wouldn't have stayed. Equally, in the same team, I had a head of department who used to ring me every morning to tell me what they were doing and ring me every night to tell me that they'd done it. And and that was what they needed to do to function in the role. And I think it's your job as a senior person to sort of go, well, actually, you know what? They're both delivering, they're both functioning, but ultimately they're both making me look good. So I'll just manage that.
Yeah, how interesting that is. And that different degrees of autonomy, reassurance, guidance, some people.
And you have to work it out for each individual. Because it will be very different for those people.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So fascinating as a whole area, which I also find fascinating, this meeting of a vision, hiring people for that vision, for the culture and helping them do well, and it's a fascinating area. But let's move on to the second area, which is the sector. Yeah, as we mentioned in our pre-podcast record chat about things being thrown at the sector the whole time and the importance of keeping going and facing the problems and still caring at the end of it. So tell me, Rich, what do you think is required from a provider in general, someone who's leading from the top, such as yourself, to help and enable the team to do that, to keep going, facing the problems and still care?
Yeah, so crikey, we've had enough problems thrown at us, haven't we, over the last few years? But even before that, this is a sector that keeps changing. It's a world that keeps changing. We have a regulator that keeps changing, and multiple touch points with different people that have different frameworks that require different things of us, whether it's commissioners, whether it's local authorities, whether it's safeguarding teams. It never stops. It's relentless. And I think we ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a population of people that we look after who are very, very vulnerable. A large proportion of the workforce, I would argue, are actually very vulnerable in terms of where they are in their lives, and it's this concoction of vulnerable people looking after vulnerable people is always going to throw up challenges and be challenging. And I think the first part is accepting that stuff does go wrong, despite everybody's best effort, and everybody if everybody works to the best of their ability and works to the best of their intentions, the nature of vulnerable people looking after vulnerable people is something will still go wrong at some point. And I think the challenge that we have in the more senior positions is to understand why stuff is going wrong. And if you can understand why, it makes it a lot easier to deal with the problem. And sometimes taking the time to understand why can be really hard, because you just want the answer now, and you want to know why this happened, and you've got and who's responsible for it, and what went wrong, and why did it go wrong, and blah, blah, and your list of questions, and what are we going to tell this person, and who's going to tell that person, and this chain of events are going to happen. You want all that information. But if I just pick up the phone and start shouting at somebody expecting it, I'm not going to get it. If I do get it, it's not going to be any fit purpose for me to be able to use it. And actually, nobody's really learnt anything from the situation. And you've got to take a step back and start asking the questions, but asking the questions in a way that says you're actually really interested in the answer, and probably acknowledging up front that the answer you're going to get is really not the answer that you want to hear. And then working out with those people why it happened, how it happened, and what you're going to do to stop it from happening again. Because there's going to be a lot of people upset about whatever has happened. And I think you've got to go through that process time and time again, so that you start to build up a level of trust in your team, that if something goes wrong, they genuinely feel that they can pick up the phone and tell you that it has gone wrong, and that they can be honest with you about what's happened. And then that just puts you in a much better place and a much better position to deal with things.
I just to add on that, the thing is with the care sector, if something does go wrong, it's usually pretty bad in comparison to other organizations if something goes wrong, because we're looking after people, there's families involved, there's vulnerable people, as we were talking about. So there is plenty of room for anger and frustration to come in. But, I guess ultimately you have to do your best to curtail and eliminate that, because it doesn't really, in the long run, it's not an emotion and feeling that will be helpful in the long run. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that is how you are running. You'll just run out of steam. You can't stay angry forever. And it is interesting, because a lot of people would mistake sort of the not getting angry and the not kind of pushing people harder as a lot of people say, well, you're too soft, or not hard enough, or actually you're too weak to manage people. And I think, well, where is the evidence that informs that opinion? And B, I've got a team of people that work for me who trust me, who I trust. Actually, I'd much rather be in that position than have a team of people who are actually a little bit scared, who, if something goes wrong, are probably going to think twice about ringing me up and telling me about it. And then I don't know what's going on. And that's a much worse position to be in. And it doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. And it doesn't mean that people aren't held to account. But it does mean that in the moment, everybody is just trying to figure out what went wrong and why, and how you start to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But I think also there is this bigger piece, isn't there, around structural change. Organizations are changing all the time. That what we're asked to deliver is changing all the time. And I think the key thing the key place to get to when you're in the more senior roles is actually to get very comfortable with the grey, because not everything is black and white. And what I've found is increasingly more and more stuff is ending up in the grey, in the middle, and being comfortable to kind of bend with things and accept that things perhaps are not how you would want them to be today, but actually give me another 2 weeks and there will be, to keep some kind of longevity, and to actually stay quite compassionate about the service you're trying to deliver, despite all of these changes that are going on around you. I think it does require that ability to bend and flex and not actually get quite so worked up about things. And I'm a member of quite a few WhatsApp groups, and there's a lot of ranty people out there, and maybe they just come onto WhatsApp to have a rant, but equally I sort of think you must be exhausted by the time you go to bed at night. Whereas, I sort of stuff happens and I think, oh, right, okay, right, and we need to deal with that, and we set out a plan and we deal with it, and it's just that consistency and that method of working. I think it does keep you going. It does enable you to turn up every day and to do the job every day in a way that shows that you're still connected to your purpose, and actually you still care about the people that work for you and that you're looking after. And you see so many people who are just a bit too close to being burnt out, and who, what's the expression everybody's using now? They're phoning it in. They're turning up and they're doing a job, but they're not really connected with why they're there. A little bit like Matt Hancock in the Jungle, really. He's turned up and done the job, but he's not really connected with anything unless somebody's been talking to him about politics. He's kind of got on with it. And that's, for me, in my organization, that's not the culture that I want to work with. I want to work with people who are actually bothered about what is happening, and constantly trying to work out how you do things better.
That's great, and that's a nice thread I think that's going through this, is like, how can you end up at the end still caring? So that's wonderful. Rich, now, it's a great episode. Is there anything that we've not covered up to now that you think you should mention?
I think the only other thing that I've been talking about has been a lot recently, has been around the notion of being kind and what that means and what it shouldn't mean.
Right.
A lot of people have been to a lot of dark places over the last few years, for obvious reasons. I think there's this thing around, you can't say, being kind means that you can't say something that might upset them, or you can't be honest with them, or you can't, have the conversations that you need to have. And I would strongly argue that actually being kind is exactly that. Actually, you do need to have, if somebody is really struggling in their role, you do need to have a conversation with them, unpick why that is happening, and because actually you might be able to do something about it. Equally, it might be time to have that honest conversation and suggest that person needs to move on. Having that type of honest conversation is actually still being kind to that person. And I think it's just about being very clear what, if you adopt that mindset, what that means, actually how positive and important it can be for people. So I'm on a bit of a mission about that at the moment. I get a bit preachy, so I'm not going to say any more than that, but that would be my kind of parting shot.
That sounds great, and great advice and ways of seeing how you run your care provider. So Rich, that's great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great episode, and thanks so much for featuring on the Care CEO Success Stories podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.